Yeah, I actually have a copy right here.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Realm of
Yeah.
Hope.
So, yeah. And then I also sell signed copies through my website, which is also linked in my social medias. So.
Hi there, viewers. Today I'm joining in conversation with author E.L. Lee. It's a pleasure to have Lisi on the show. Hi there, Lisi.
Hello.
It's a
Thank you for
pleasure.
having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. I'm excited to speak with you.
Yeah. I'm very excited to be interviewed by you. It's nice to have the pleasure of being interviewed by you. I've seen your videos, I've seen the interviews you've conducted, and I feel so honored.
Thank you so much. That's fun. So, Lee, I love your book's title, Realm of Hope. And I'm curious to ask you, how did this book come about? I mean, what inspired this book?
Yeah, so I grew up with Japanese role-playing games, also known as JRPGs.
Okay.
They're a type of video game where you play through a story. And the first form of inspiration was a JRPG called Kingdom Hearts, which I played as a kid.
Okay.
I was also a huge fan of Percy Jackson and Marvel's Cinematic Universe and Avatar: The Last Airbender. So I've been writing my whole life. I wrote forms of media like comic books and short stories and screenplays. And yeah, so I was always a lover of fantasy. I originally wrote Realm of Hope in the form of a screenplay for a JRP type of video game, where back when I was a teenager and I wrote 5 other screenplays that were meant to be adapted as video games, all taking place in the
Wow.
same universe. Yeah,
Wow.
and eventually, as one who is in the game industry now, I learned how difficult this is to make a game like that. So I decided these stories I wrote would be much better off in the form of books. So I took Realm of Hope's original script and I rewrote it in the form of the trilogy. So Realm of Hope is the first installment in the trilogy, and the other screenplays will eventually be written in the form of trilogies and duologies as well.
Wow. That sounds quite fascinating. That sounds
Yeah.
very great.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely been a long journey. The ideas for Realm of Hope have been in my head for, I think, at least 12 years now. So
Wow.
it's amazing just seeing it come to life in the form of a book.
Wow, that's very fun. That's quite intriguing. I was also going to ask you, how do you develop passion to write a fantasy novel? Do you have an author or a particular book that inspires you?
Yeah, so like I said before, I grew up as a lover of fantasy and creating stories.
Yeah.
I love the freedom that you have when writing fantasy. The fact that you can essentially do whatever you want with it. I love magic, creating magical creatures, weapons, and cool fight scenes, action, adventure. And there's so many ideas that I've come up with that I want to put into stories for people to see. So I take a lot of inspiration from Brandon Sanderson, Rick Riordan, and Lee Bardugo. Their books are definitely my favorites. So yeah, like I guess I just kind of I love reading their books and having just seeing what works well with their books, and I love using that as inspiration for my writing career.
Yeah, it's fun how, reading books can also inspire people to write their own books. That's something that I so much love personally. Yeah,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
was also going to ask you, I see that Realm of Hope is a Fox in trilogy.
Yes.
It's a Fox in trilogy. And could you tell us about the progress of the next publications?
Yeah. So Realm of Hope itself is technically not a novel. It's considered an epic because it's
Wow.
140,000 word count. So
Wow.
I plan on having yearly releases, and I hope to have the sequel published next year. I'm currently 25K words into writing the first draft of the sequel. I like taking my time crafting a fantasy epic, as I feel that way with the way everything is set up with the world and characters and magic system. There's a lot of time spent on making sure everything aligns well, making sure everything is consistent in the rules of my universe. And after Realm of Hope's trilogy is complete, I plan on writing other books that take place in the same universe but different time periods.
Wow, that's fun. 140,000 words is not a joke. It's not a play.
Yes,
That's
for sure.
amazing. You did a
Yeah,
great
for sure.
job.
Thank you.
That's quite a thrilling. For readers like me who haven't read Realm of Hope, because I actually have it on my TV on my laptop, which I'm currently looking forward to reading, and without giving much information, could we have a sneak of what we had expect picking up Realm of Hope? I mean, could you tell us a bit about the book?
Yeah. So Realm of Hope is a young adult fantasy epic that has a lot of action and sci-fi elements. I thought
Okay.
it'd be unique to have a fantasy universe set in a futuristic time period, rather than most fantasy I've seen take place in more like medieval or more ancient times. It's about a teams of superhero teenagers trying to save the world in the mortal realm from dark threats. Since this takes place in a futuristic time period, a lot of them are descended from past heroes that will have roles in my other books within the same universe. So basically, expect to see a lot of cool fight scenes, people with awesome supernatural powers with plenty of room to grow as they
Wow.
grow as superheroes, and uncovering many secrets within the mortal realm along the way.
Wow, that's great. I'm a very good lover of fantasy. And like you said, it adds an element of science fiction in it. I'm very sure it's going to be something quite enthralling to read.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know. I just love having my own unique take on fantasy.
That's that's fantastic. So I'd love to know your opinion about fiction. Your
Mhm.
novel is a fiction story, which I'm still yet to read, and I can't wait to get to it. Before that, I'd love to say that I'm always been fascinated with fiction writers, source of inspiration. Like to me, I think it's a hard thing to do or to write compared to writing non-fictions, which is actually a real life story being form of a memoir, a biography, an autobiography, etc. Then I'd love to hear from you what's your take about writing fiction. Is this something that you consider very easy to do, or it's a difficult task for you?
Yeah, so fiction is super easy for me to write. I love
Wow.
coming up with interesting ideas and new concepts. You could say I naturally love creating rules in a fictional universe and world building. I take a lot of inspiration from the stories I love and Greek and Roman mythology and so much more. I also love giving representation to areas lacking in it within the fantasy genre. I guess like I love how like there's a lot of freedom that you have with writing fantasy and writing fiction, and there's not like a whole lot of things that you need to base entirely on real life with a lot of nonfiction, and I just love having the creative freedom because I love letting my imagination go wild.
Wow, that's great. That sounds quite interesting to me. And I've also read a bit of fantasy novels. Like I'm a lover of fantasy. There's a one I read recently which actually got me enthralled. And they're just so
Oh.
amazing to me. I love to hear from you as a fantasy writer. What intrigues you most about fantasy novels? Is there anything?
Yeah, so I think what intrigues me the most is seeing what sort of ideas fantasy writers come up with. What is unique about their world, the magic, the creatures in it, what cool abilities people have. Seeing what sets everyone apart from each other, I think definitely intrigues me. There's so much you can do with fantasy. Like you
Yeah,
could have a magical school, you could have a fantasy retelling of a fairy tale, and
yeah,
it's always really interesting seeing what does someone come up with that that like they came up with their imagination that
yeah.
is their own unique spin on it.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why I'm just so enthralled with fantasy. I don't know how people come up with this idea. It's almost pulls me in. I'm like, wow, these people need they deserve some award.
Right, for sure.
Yeah, I also read on Amazon that the book contains some content warning like graphic violence, death, suicide, depiction of PTSD, and God. And I'd love to know if you were intentional about adding this theme to your book. And if yes, how do you think these features make it a good read?
Yes, so it is my intent to add these themes to the book. I feel like with the premise of the story being about trying to save the world and dealing with dark forces and threats, we definitely need to set up the stakes. We want to give the characters emotional struggle, having them deal with death and tragedy and violence. I think it helps the characters grow and it takes them to a new level. And I like adding the emotional struggle to help the readers relate to the characters and empathize with them. I want to portray how trauma and loss can change a character and show how different characters deal with this. I also wanted to depict characters with clear mental health struggles and give those struggles representation.
Wow. That sounds quite enthralling. Again, I want to know about this. What are the challenges you encountered while writing The Realm of Hope? If there is any, could you share with us and how you ultimately overcame it? Because I know it can be
Uh,
a daunting work.
For sure. I think the editing process was definitely the biggest challenge, along with
Oh,
making sure everything in my universe made sense. Fantasy can be incredibly difficult to make consistent and make sure all the details line up because of how
yeah,
much freedom you get.
yeah, yeah.
And I think one of the hardest things was making sure that the audience could understand what I was trying to write. I had beta readers to make sure the audience understood how a certain magical ability works or how a character's powers could increase to certain levels and perform certain feats. Also, during the editing process, I dealt with imposter syndrome and often lost sight of how good the story actually was because
Oh,
it often happens when you stare at your own work for too long.
yeah,
Sometimes you get some sort of creator blindness. And I often took breaks to kind of deal with this and then just look at it like a few weeks later and be like, oh, hey, this is actually isn't that bad. And then
yeah.
I also kept track of all the positive feedback I've gotten in like one Google Doc, and then I look back at it to keep myself motivated.
Yeah, I love that, particularly that aspect that you said that, you have to go over it again after some weeks. It's something that I always advise authors to do. Like if you're writing a book and it's a bit too much for you, you just give it a break. Take like a 2 weeks break for it. So when you're coming back to it, everything looks new and you'll be able to cite out some other aspect of it very well. It's something that I so much love, and I'm happy to hear that from you also. Then I was also going to ask you, could you tell us what publishing is like for a published author like yourself? What are the challenges you've encountered in terms of marketing your book? And what are the mediums you've utilized so far to promote Realm of Hope?
Yeah. So publishing is definitely a complex process for newbie authors. I found tons of guides on YouTube and TikTok to understand how to set everything up. I think I had it a bit easier since I did a lot of research before I got to the publishing stage. So I kind of like had an idea of what to do before my book was ready to publish.
Okay.
I think sometimes getting social media engagement can be a bit of a struggle and figuring out how to hook your audience and get them to buy your book. I've mostly used TikTok and other social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram. I've also run giveaways, collaborated with other authors, partook in author interviews, and I've also set up merchandise for Realm of Hope that I'm going to be have available for sale soon.
Wow, that's great. That's fascinating. Then, is there anything you would love to share with the viewers about your book that I haven't or couldn't mention in my interview, and you just love the viewers to know?
Yeah, so like I said before, Realm of Hope was written as a video game originally, and it still kind of retains some of those elements when being rewritten as a book, such as characters leveling up in the
Okay.
terms of ranking and abilities as superheroes. There's also a map and a cast of characters list located at the front of the book, as I wanted to challenge myself with writing a massive fantasy world with a big cast that has plenty of diversity. And I just love having those resources at the front of the book, definitely to make it easier to keep track of all the information.
Wow, that's great. That's fascinating. Now, as a published author of The Realm of Hope, what sort of advice do you have for writers who are still struggling with publishing a book? What would you love to tell people in this category?
I would just like to say that we're all kind of in this together. There's a lot to learn, I think, for everyone. And the writing community on social media, especially like Twitter and Instagram and TikTok, they're super supportive.
Yeah,
And I've learned just so much from them alone. Definitely engage with your community. And I also will say, keep writing what you want to read.
yeah. That's great. That's fascinating. Now, could you tell us where can we get your book? On Amazon, Instacart, any other platform? Where are they available for purchase?
Yeah, so they're currently available on Amazon
Do you have
and Barnes.
copies over there you can just show to the audience?
Yeah, I actually have a copy right here.
Great. Yeah.
Yeah.
Realm of
Yeah.
Hope.
So, yeah. And then I also sell signed copies through my website, which is also linked in my social medias. So,
Yeah. I'll
yeah.
put a link to your website in the description part of the video.
Thank you. That's super helpful.
So, viewers, you've just watched us speak together with E.L. Lai, the author of The Realm of Hope. It's a pleasure to have Lizzie on the show and to have her talk about her book, The Realm of Hope. It's currently available on Amazon, and I left a link in the description part of this video if you'd like to get a copy directly on Amazon. Thank you so much, Lizzie, for accepting the invitation to be featured on P English Literature. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I definitely appreciate you taking the time to interview me.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
best of luck.